Hey everyone, it's Nicholas here with the first of three videos introducing and explaining a new meta-crisis response focused meta theory that I call IDEM. In this first video, I'll be explaining IDEM from the perspective of its intention and structure. In the second, I'll adopt a frame of vision and narrative. And in the third, I'll be looking at IDEM with respect to short-term priorities, in particular including a vast and daunting project concerning the transformation of science. Now, IDEM in its current form was sparked by a seminar series I'm attending, hosted by Integral Life, called A View from Somewhere, a conversational introduction to planetary meta-studies. And I think it was in the third episode of that series that one of the hosts, Mark Edwards, said something like, the meta level of the meta crisis is a deficit of imagination. Now, I'm probably misquoting him, and he probably didn't mean it this way, but it started me imagining what would the meta root of the meta crisis be if it wasn't just a deficiency in imagination. So diving further into that line of thinking and inspired significantly by later episodes in the seminar series, I was struck by a naive but provocative and perhaps constructive thought. What if, rather than simply being a symptom of the meta crisis, division was actually also its causal root? So I call this conjecture the causal mechanism of division, or CMOD, and hypothesize that it occurs in the very pre-material layers of our universe.
To understand a little more what I mean by the CMOD, the causal mechanism of division, let's look at a simplistic illustration using critical realism's framework of real, actual, and empirical levels. Here, the CMOD is a real causal mechanism that draws on an actual pool of energy which fuels socio-political division. Some of this energy flows back into the pool, creating a positive feedback loop. And obviously, there are many, many other dynamics at play not shown here. By the way, the figure numbers here are from an essay I'll be saying more about at the end of this presentation. So this CMOD conjecture then becomes the founding move in IDEM's new meta-crisis-focused meta-theoretical framework. That's the CMOD. How does it relate most deeply to the meta-crisis? So in integral theory, massively simplifying again, I hear that the meta-crisis is caused by humankind's relative lack of realized enlightenment, and that the meta-crisis can help us move deeper into realization. We could call this a distal singular view of causation. And again, as a simplification, critical realism might emphasize instead defective power structures in modernity as the key issue, and this might be called a contextual proximal analysis. Now, while IDEM agrees with both of these perspectives, it adds something new. Again here, the CMOD as a singular proximal cause of the meta-crisis. This CMOD not only enacts division, but also perhaps contributes to the lack of enlightenment that we see in the world, although this analytical conjecture isn't one that IDEM pursues centrally. Now, for the causal mechanism of division to be a candidate for meta-crisis origin, obviously division itself would have to be at least a pervasive meta-crisis symptom, a view I mentioned earlier. So before getting to IDEM itself, I just want to ground the pervasive division frame by refreshing your attention to a couple of well-known and powerful meta-crisis approaches. Here's a depiction of Otto Scharmer's three great divides that he takes to be key aspects of the meta-crisis. A, the divide between egoic and true self, though I divide this divide into two distinct subcomponents in IDEM. B, the divide between self and other, and C, the divide between self and nature. Another view of division in the meta-crisis comes from Kate Raworth's Donut Economics, which points out the divide between the global north, overshooting ecological limits, and the global south, under-fulfilling basic social economic needs. Raworth's analysis differs from Scharmer's primarily by emphasizing economic factors instead of psychospiritual and psychotherapeutic issues. but both perspectives can be construed as ultimately emphasizing planetary scale divisions. So now let's turn to IDEM. IDEM stands for Initiatory Division Inquiring Meta-theory. Initiatory because, to my knowledge, it's the first meta-theory to explicitly propose anything like the CMOD as a causal force at work in the meta-crisis. Importantly, IDEM suggests that this causal mechanism of division is active at least at the very scale of our universe. After positing the CMOD, IDEM then makes two ancillary conjectures. One, the CMOD is the singular proximal root of the metacrisis, as I've mentioned. And two, the CMOD originates itself in a specific relational dysfunction, which I'll get into more shortly. To be clear, IDEM's founding intention is to provide timely and effective response to the metacrisis. It doesn't aim to replace existing meta-theories, but rather to offer something new that can help, if it can. Now, one useful way to understand IDEM further is by comparing it to integral theory, IT, and critical realism, CR, as I already started to do earlier. Neither of these theories was originally designed to address the meta-crisis, so there may be potential for a new, intentionally devoted approach to deepen our understanding. In introducing IDEM here and elsewhere, I explore how it intersects with IT and CR, specifically when it comes to dimensions like idealism versus realism, which I'll come back to in just a moment, actually, agency versus structure, and especially consciousness versus matter, as I'll discuss in a bit more detail over this 3-video series. As we'll also see, IDEM is essentially, quintessentially, relationally focused, which might place it somewhat in the lineage of Whitehead and Vygotsky, differentiating it somewhat from IT and CR. To develop a richer context for exploring the CMOD-related conjectures we just saw, I embed them within a form of awakening cosmopsychism, a trendy idea these days, though it's been at the heart of IDEM precursors since 2010. IDEM takes a stance that could be described as idealist realism concerning matter. Matter exists in the first instance as numbers in the mind of the universe, regardless of our observation of it. Existing as numbers leads to what I call form-agnostic computational realism concerning matter. Now, one final crucial point here. You do not need to fully adopt IDEM's ontology, or many of its other features, actually, to participate in it. IDEM emphasizes epistemic humility and invites collaboration across different perspectives as a key to forming effective functional coalitions. Now, in IDEM's awakening cosmopsychism setting, let's look at some relational details in the deep structure of what I call the real dream. This is a non-dual monotheistic vision in which the universe expands from an ultimate creative source with CMOD-implicated relational dysfunctions occurring at almost every level currently. The crucial point here is that the CMOD originates first in relational locus 1 between universe parents and ultimate parent. And although they're visually depicted here at spatially separated relational loci, all subsequent CMOD-mediated dysfunctions, all the red arrows, are part of a singular CMOD complex dependent on and then re-expressing the locus 1 dysfunction. So what does all this have to do with the metacrisis, for example, as understood by Sharma? Here, I put Sharma's analysis of the more superficial terrestrial aspects of the metacrisis alongside the deep dream picture I just showed you. IDEM then conjectures that all the red arrows in this image here, deep and more superficial, are CMOD-involved relational dysfunctions, simply ramifying the locus 1 issue into more and more places. So in summary, the CMOD conjecture leads to a new, insightful, detailed, unifying, superficial, and deep framing of the metacrisis. Although, of course, I'm only touching on some features of that claim here in this short presentation. Ultimately, comprehensive understanding may be important, but it has to create useful remedial action. To this end, on the deeper side of things, IDEM defines three reality classes I call I Science, I Spirituality, and I Religion. The words there differ in technical detail from their everyday uses. If we can create synergistic versions of these three, they can then work together, bringing specific gifts and working on specific pieces of the deep structure. I Religion can bring altitude and depth, working at the top and bottom of the red arrow collection. I Science can bring precision to engagement with the numerical aspect of matter in particular. And I Spirituality can source light from what I call the one being level and share it with religion and science, which are working in dark and confusing realms. Of course, in the more superficial terrestrial domain, shown here to the left, the CMOD continues to act and feed itself independently of deep dream dynamics, for example, as I showed in the socio-political feedback loop on the very first slide. And obviously, there's a lot of important work already going on with respect to terrestrial metacrisis dynamics, with which IDEM finds natural comradeship. But particularly concerning Sharma's divide in and from self, loci 5 and 8 here, it's important for IDEM's science, spirituality, religion triplet to have a precisely coherent partner. And the work on deck for this role is Richard Harvey's psychospiritual psychotherapy, which he calls sacred attention therapy, or SAT. Finally, of course, we don't actually have synergistic versions of science, spirituality, and religion right now. So catalyzing those is a major goal for IDEM. Using class 1, 2, and 3 as alternative nomenclature for I Science, spirituality, and religion, IDEM focuses on an evolution from self-contradiction to mutual contradiction to mutual cooperation, finally, based on epistemic humility. As I'll talk about more in the third video, the evolution from a class 1 dash to a class 1 double dashed science using the science of phenomenal consciousness as a lever is one of the most necessary, complex, and daunting projects humanity has ever attempted. In summary, then, IDEM conjectures a causal mechanism of division, or CMOD, originating in a relational dysfunction, and embeds it in a tentative ontology. It then relates the consequent structure of the deep real dream to everyday metacrisis dynamics and identifies I Science, spirituality, and religion as three crucially relevant cultural realms. It then seeks to catalyze the evolution to a synergistic coalition of sacred attention therapy and the three pivotal classes of reality theory. The objective of this coalition is to contain and curtail the CMOD as the engine of division behind the metacrisis. A relationally focused theory, IDEM sees the consciousness-matter relationship as its most constructive focus to serve its metacrisis response intention. As I'll discuss further in the next couple of videos, this relationship occurs both in the depths of the real dream, in our universe's mind-body relationship, and in the science of phenomenal consciousness, which I've mentioned as the crucial domain for the evolution of modern science. Finally, given that IT has a relative consciousness focus and CR a relative matter focus, one strategic conjecture is that there may be a metacrisis role for an IT-CR IDEM-like metatheory coalition. Here, the complementary role of the IDEM-like member would be specifically to guardian the consciousness-matter relationship. So where are we now? As I said at the beginning, IDEM in its current form was only born in the last couple of months, although I've been dedicated to its precursors for more than 25 years now. The immediate priority is to articulate, communicate, and refine the approach via the commentary of interested and informed folks. Perhaps these people will actually help me refute it by helping to see that there's nothing truly helpful in it after all. So the primary means of articulation and communication right now is via this Substack. where I'll be sharing a book-length essay in 5 somewhat bite-sized chunks. Part 1 is out for preliminary comment and will be released more widely on Substack on April the 1st. Part 2 is complete and Part 3 is halfway done. In the past decade or so, I've tried to take a rapid prototyping approach, putting out small versions to see what lands and how to bring these ideas to life in dynamic ways. Now, this modality can be pretty challenging for something as large, complex, and detail-dependent as IDEM, but if you'd like to follow along or participate, please feel free to email me or sign up for the Substack. Finally, huge thanks to Mark, Bruce, and Namali from A View from Somewhere, and to all the seminar participants. Over just the past couple of months, you've helped me distill a quarter of a century into the IDEM framework I'm sketching in this video series.
Again, I'm Nicholas. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon.